Hi guys, it's Coach Anthony back at you with another edition of Animate, bringing chess to life. The king is the main target in chess, therefore it makes sense to keep him safe. To do so, there is a special move called castling. The idea is to place the king in a bunker room while the battle is ongoing until the latter stages when the king is able to flex his muscles and show his strength. To demonstrate castling, we're going to look at the two main pieces used for castling, and that is the king and the rooks. Now, castling is a special move where the king, on its first move and its first move only, can actually move 2 squares. You might be saying, hey coach, but I thought you said the king can only move 1 square. Well, it is a special move and it's the only time the king can move 2 squares. But not only can the king move, the rook can move as well. So basically it's a 2-in-1 move, which is very rare in chess because usually it's turn by turn. So to actually get 2 moves in 1 turn must be a very good thing. How does it work? Well, the first thing is the space has to be clear between the king and the rook. That means nothing can be sitting on those squares F1 or G1. The most important thing is that the king hasn't moved and the rook hasn't moved, because if either piece has moved already, you give up your right to this special move. Well, it's as simple as this. The king moves 2 squares, 2 squares to the right, and the rook switches sides and lands on the square F1. So what we have now is a king that's not easily able to be attacked from many different angles, and we'll show that a little bit later. Castling can happen on either side of the board. Just a while ago we saw it happen on the king side of the board, where we had this type of thing going on. But it can also happen on the queen side of the board, which means that as long as there is no pieces sat on the following squares D1, C1, B1, the king hasn't moved and the rook hasn't moved, once again castling can occur. How does it happen? The king moves 2 squares to the left, 1, 2, and the rook jumps over and lands on the square D1, and we have castling. Unfortunately, there are times when we are not allowed to castle. If your king is in check, you cannot castle. We have queen to e7 from the black team, placing the white king in check. Unfortunately, the king is not allowed to jump 2 squares and then castle. As you can see, if I try to do this, it won't even let me do it because it's an illegal move. This is a good time to pause your video and work out what is the best option for the white team. Let's check the answer. First of all, we look to see, can we capture this queen? And unfortunately, we've got no piece that can help us capture the queen. So capturing is out of the window. Well, we can run. We can run to the square F1 or to the square D1 or even the square D2. So running is definitely an option. However, if we still want to keep the chance of castling, the best move would be to block. That is to use our bishop on C1, block the check, and now we still have the possibility of castling queenside or kingside. Another situation where the king is not allowed to castle is if the square or squares it needs to pass through in order to castle are attacked by enemy pieces. And if you remember from the earlier rules, a king is not allowed to go to any square where it will be in check. So let's see this scenario. It is black's turn to move, and we see that white would dearly love to play the move king to g1 and castle. Quickly pause your video and try to work out a way for the black team to prevent this from happening. Let's check the answer. That answer is bishop to a6. This is a very sneaky move because when the bishop lands on the square a6, it controls this entire diagonal and most importantly the f1 square, which is a square the king would need to go through in order to castle. And since kings are not allowed to go to any square where they'll be in check, this will prevent castling. Let's see it in action. So we have bishop to a6, and as you can see, even if I try to make this move, the computer will completely not allow me to do this move because it's an illegal move. For white, the idea would be to somehow prevent the black bishop from having this influence on the diagonal. One idea could be those little guys. Once again, the minion on c3 or the pawn can move one square forward and quite simply block the bishop, which then gives white a chance on their next move to castle. The final situation where the king is not allowed to castle is if when it castles, the square it lands on in order to castle is being attacked, which goes back again to that rule that a king cannot go into any square where it will be in check. Let's have a look at this. It is black's turn to move here, and black would dearly love to play the move king to c8 and castle. So let's try that. Oh no, something is wrong. Let's have a look. And we spy the bishop on h3, which is controlling that diagonal, not allowing us to castle. Because as we can see, the squares we need to pass through in order to castle are the squares d8 and c8. The d8 square is no problem as it's not being attacked by any enemy piece. However, the c8 is because when we land there, we'd land into check. So, quick question. How could we come up with a plan in order to make castling still possible? Pause the video. Back again to check the answer. Well, once again, we need to really dim the influence of the bishop along this diagonal. And there aren't many pieces that can help us at the moment. However, we can create a plan. Not necessarily a plan in one move. However, we can use those little guys once again. It would not be good to try to block by moving this little guy up 2, because quite simply the bishop will just snap it off and we still have the same problem. So what we can do is prepare that move. How, you may ask? Well, we could move our G pawn forward, and on our next move, maybe we could now create a pawn chain which would block the bishop and allow us to steal castle. Another idea might be to develop our pieces like this, and then castle kingside once our knight and bishop are out of the way. Remember, we can castle king or queenside. So that was quite tricky, guys. So let's recap. Castling is an important move that helps keep our king safe. In order to castle, the space must be clear between the king and the rook. The king moves 2 spaces towards the rook, and the rook lands next to the king. You're not allowed to castle if your king or rook have already moved, since castling can only be done on the king's first move. You are not allowed to castle if your king is in check. You cannot castle if the king passes through a check square. You cannot castle if the king lands on a check square after castling. Be sure to look out for my castling practice video to really get the hang of it. Please like and subscribe in order to get more videos. See you all on the next video.